So thank you for being here and joining today together wherever you are, around Australia, around the world, this one planet that we share, that we're a part of. In bringing ourselves fully into the moment, we're able to restore our most natural state of being. As we restore this connection with our most natural state of being, of course we become acutely aware of ourselves, each other, and of life. And we know as truth seekers that we look at our life as it is today and we wonder what is happening and what it is we can do about what is happening, because we're ever more aware that our social economic systems are thwarting true growth and well-being on this planet. Of course, if we look around us, we can see that the environment is suffering, that we seem to be a great burden on the planet. This human experience seems like a bit of a runaway train. Well, if we want to understand our part in this and our relationship with the environment today, we need to start looking back into our human nature and our relationship with life itself, because this is the thing that is at question. And this is the thing which is also at risk, greatly at risk today. We are seeing an unprecedented rate of extinction on the planet, corresponding with the advance, the so-called advance of human life, civilization. And so we see a breaking down of our environment, and then along with that, of course, our relationship with the environment has been profoundly strained. So although we can look outside of ourselves for answers, really the quest is a return to our innermost being to find those answers. Because actually the breakdown of our relationship with nature began with that disconnection from our own essential self. So although traditionally, and perhaps for hundreds of years or a few thousand years, we've considered enlightenment to be a quest to transcend life and the world, I see that today more than ever we need to recognise that the journey of awakening and enlightenment is not something in isolation to the rest of life. It is a re-merging with the rest of life. Historically, we've thought of this self-realisation or awakening to mean that we can somehow escape this wheel of suffering on the planet, when in actual fact it's because we've held these erroneous views that we have inadvertently actually disconnected ourselves even more. We see it as something as removed, and we've tended to separate ourselves, want to withdraw and somehow ascend so that we don't have to come back into the world. Actually, if we look back into a time when, as humans, we were profoundly connected with nature, we see that we did live with a great conscious relationship with life. If we look back to our indigenous roots, we can see how this relationship was nurtured and sustained so that we were able to live for tens of thousands of years as humans in harmonious accord with the environment without destroying it, without disturbing it. So it's quite ironic, isn't it, that we consider ourselves to be a more evolved society and civilized, and that we've progressed, we have great technological advance, etc., and yet we are destroying this planet at an unprecedented rate. So what then is the difference? How is it we find ourselves in such peril? When did we lose this harmonious connection with nature? If we look back through the passage of human so-called progress and development, we go back to a time on the shift, the verge from indigenous living, where we were tribal, nomadic. We did, to some degree, interact with life, nature, and sometimes cultivate it. But there was a certain turning point where we took up agriculture. And at around this turning point, there was a shift in the psyche of the human. It shifted into a phase of knowing. And we can think of that as the entering the epoch of Pisces. And this has been one of the stages in the great Kali Yuga that's been outlined by sacred texts, a time of darkness and ignorance on the planet. So during this epoch or phase of knowing, we shifted from a relationship of connected knowing into belief. So Pisces, that epoch, is actually about belief, where we disconnect from true knowingness. And that's what the Kali Yuga actually tells us, that humanity takes this journey away from a relationship which is consciously knowing, a state of conscious intelligence, into the mind and into identification. And that's what this whole age of beliefs has been about. We have become lost in conditioned stories. So at this shift into agriculture, the human psyche started to take greater ownership and belief. The belief that it knew better than nature, that somehow we were in control or could control nature. Not just control nature, but control each other. So as we shift more into this phase of identification, and we become more and more immersed in these beliefs, conditioned beliefs, we actually become more and more disconnected from knowingness itself and beingness itself. Along with all these identifications, the notion that we could somehow control nature and control each other, we began to manipulate the environment. We began to manipulate nature. And this was all rooted in the identification of the individual self, so believing that we are fundamentally separate. And that is the root of our suffering and ignorance, the fact that we think somehow we are truly separate from life, existence, and from each other, from nature. And so the more we travel along that track, the more deeply rooted we become in the identifications and the more disconnected we become. And as we become more disconnected, we actually develop a greater and greater emptiness, a greater and greater sense of lack. And along with that greater and greater sense of emptiness and lack comes a quest to fulfill ourselves from outside. Because we're empty on the inside and we're disconnected from that inherent life force, our spirit, our soul, our essential being. Because we're disconnected from that, we're no longer feeling that wellspring of life force. We're looking for substance outside of ourself. Of course, that tips us into a materialistic cycle. So if we look at the spiralling journey into greater and greater destruction on the planet, we see it corresponds with this shift, that we started to close ourselves off from our innate relationship with all of life. We assumed a position of control and possession. You think about society today, we measure our worth on progress and achievement in material terms. What we can do, what we can get, rather than our intrinsic nature. And consequently, as we experience this momentum of feeling greater and greater emptiness, we chase more and more substance outside ourselves. So we're caught up in this materialistic loop. And we lose sight of the fact that Earth isn't just an object, one of resource for, our own gains and material desires to be fulfilled, but that Earth is actually conscious intelligence. It is life force. So what does this have to do with us as truth seekers? And in relation to awakening, it has everything to do with it. Because, as I was pointing out before, we've assumed for the last few thousand years through spiritual teachings that somehow we've fallen from grace, and that we've come into ignorance, and that we actually need to go back home to something outside or beyond form, earth, away from. And so we've isolated ourselves and removed ourselves from the world, assuming that we have to go somewhere else. When in actual fact, that thwarts our awakening. As I said before, awakening is not in isolation. Awakening is a re-merging with all life. It is a remembering of all life, of the all great self. And planet Earth, the great conscious field that she is, and every single living being is actually an intelligent source of this. So let's look at what happened when we were living in nature, when we were in harmony with all life. As Indigenous people, we nurtured and fostered a relationship that understood the connectivity of all existence, and also had a profound relationship with the unseen realms. So, for example, I'll speak of, in terms of Indigenous law, teachings, LORE. We can look back into those teachings and understandings of sacred law to recognise fundamental universal principles that existed over the entire planet, a relationship between humans and all life. There are 4 key principles that are universal in sacred law. And these all come under the primary understanding of right relationship or sacred relationship. And that this right relationship is one of unconditional love and care and respect of all things and all beings. So key in this are 4 principles, and not one comes first or before the other, because it's actually a living circle. It's a recognition of the intrinsic nature of ourself and life, and the relationship of ourself and life and creation. So we have the principle of belonging with land, life, nature. And that means our home, our place, the natural environment that we're a part of, and the world as a whole. Our intrinsic belonging, that we didn't just land here, but that Earth herself gave birth to us. We belong to her. The second principle is kinship, that we don't exist in isolation. We are a family, not just of those who brought us into the world, our parents or our siblings, but also every living creature that is part of this world with us. This kinship means we understand the conscious intelligence and life force of all creatures and all beings. We then have the principle of spirit itself, the life force that is within every single one of us and every single thing, that life force is the same. It is the unborn, the undying. It is the thread, the continuum of existence. It is the source of all energy and higher intelligence. That spirit is what connects us inwardly and outwardly. That spirit is what unites us with our eternal self. That, the fourth principle, is the creation laws, the unseen realm, recognizing that actually what we are and what we experience is directed by powers and a force far greater than any one individual self. So these four principles, when they are known and understood, hold us in a profound fabric of connectedness. If one of these principles is lost or broken, that fabric loosens, it weakens. And each of those principles supports and feeds into the other. So if we go back again and we consider what happened when we shifted from being nomadic, tribal, cultivating, having this nurtured relationship, understanding the sacred law of all life existence and our relationship with each other, and we look at the fact that the moment we took up agriculture, we took on beliefs of power and control, individual power and control, was the moment we became dispossessed. We were no longer belonging with nature. We were no longer able to truly belong with nature. We belonged to whoever controlled nature. So if we follow this trail, we see that disconnection with nature, no longer belonging with nature, in the way we inherently are created. And then we see that disconnection means we're cut off from the spirit, the life force, and the conscious intelligence of all life, because we're no longer having that relationship with land, nature. Then our kinship with land, nature, and all creatures is broken. And again, we lose this vast source of intelligence that guides us. All of life is a steward for all of life. And along with that breakdown, what happens is, if we don't have a living connection with nature and with all creatures, it actually cuts us off from the source of love of the planet, and we feel a greater emptiness. And so we go then into that downward spiral, the materialistic spiral, because we've lost the energy of love. And do you know why there's been such a struggle throughout these more modern ages to embrace and accept spiritual teachings and the notion of universal love? It's because those truths, spiritual teachings, and the universal love actually demands us to wake up again to the reality that we are not in control. And that is a terribly frightening thing for the human of beliefs. That is a terribly threatening thing for the ego. Because to truly love and to be truly connected with life, we have to surrender control. We have to accept the truth that these forces of nature are working us. There is a power far greater over and above all of us. So the one solution to restore life on this planet now today is awakening. It is awakening that points us back to this connection. It restores our connection with our spirit, and in restoring that connection with our inner being, we feel again, we see again our true nature. We're able to see each other as being of the one same field. We're able to awaken again true kinship, true communion with all beings, to hold sacred and dear all life. And it's only when we can regain this kinship, this communion, that we will truly have a feeling, caring intelligence again. And that's when we come back into a conscious relationship and we come into the age of knowing. And that's what we're entering now, regaining and knowing. And that's not something that can be learned. All these principles I just spoke of very, very briefly, which are the basis of Indigenous law, all these principles, they're not mental constructs. They're not something that can be mentally learned. It is only something that can be deeply remembered. And in order to deeply remember it, we must restore the right conditions and the right relationship in ourselves. And that means we have to come back in. We have to connect with the right level of our being in order to regain the right relationship with all life. Once we have this, we will have the answers. We will build conscious, value-based systems together. With that feeling conscious relationship, we care enough about every being. And when we care enough about every being, we cannot do to another what we would not do to ourselves. We know the sacred circle of life. That doesn't mean that we don't need to eat and consume to continue living, but it means that we restore our sacred relationship. And along with it, the environment can begin to thrive again. So awakening has everything to do with restoring our environment. And our environment has everything to do with supporting our awakening. They work hand in hand. Let's just take a little moment to contemplate this before we open the space for some inquiry and whatever questions you might have. So again, taking a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Acknowledging, again, this inner connection within you. And as you do in particular, allow yourself to recognize that this within you, that you are connecting with, the life force, the spirit, the consciousness within you, it is not isolated within you or any particular select individuals. It is the underlying essence of every single living thing. Notice that as you connect with this, it's not just some little bubble inside of you. The more deeply you connect with this, the more you feel that actually it permeates your whole being. It radiates beyond your being. It emanates into all of existence, and all of existence is doing exactly the same. It is not separate from you. It too is emanating, vibrating into you. It is one all-connected field, all vibrating as this ever constant, eternal life force. It contains the intrinsic divine intelligence, the sacred laws, the love that restores all of us, that brings wellness and goodness to every single thing. And as we embrace this now, already we are in communion with the whole planet and with every living being. As you acknowledge this, take a deep breath into your heart center. And as you breathe out, feel yourself breathing love into all living beings. And as you breathe in, feel the love, the life force of all living beings sustaining you. And now take a moment of acknowledgement and gratitude for all life. And that here, as you restore your connection with your innermost being, you are restoring the connection and true communion with all life. Taking a deep breath with this gratitude into your body, feeling the love, the nurturing of life flowing within you. Feeling yourself centered, present, and connected with all life. Take another deep breath into your body, gently stretch, and slowly open your eyes.